Fighting Words, Volume 2. Escaping and Embracing the Cops of Chicago. Chapter 14. Just one last favor for the bride-to-be. Part 1. Meeting Gretchen. Gretchen seemed transfixed by my stream of consciousness dream girl when I came back down to earth and looked into her eyes. She had teased me for so long to answer her many sensual questions that I guess she couldn't believe that I was actually drawing this dreamy, imaginary girl in the air with my words. I must have seemed so forlorn that rainy evening that Gretchen broke out of her spell, came close to me, put her small hands on my shoulders, pulling me quickly toward her and delicately kissing my cheek. Then, wordlessly, she turned and walked away from me, in the rain, toward her apartment on the next street over. Soft lips, Gretchen, and such nice perfume. I could inhale Gretchen's scent for the rest of the evening. Soft lips. My imaginary girl dissolved in the steady rain, making a drumbeat on my wooden roof. Ah, Gretchen, why can't I find a girl like you? Part 2. She comes back and tells me a story. Gretchen's smile wilted a little, and she just sighed. Then she began twisting a small white handkerchief that she was holding around her fingers, so I waited to see what came next. She looked around behind her for one of the old wooden stools I kept outside. If someone stopped by to see me for a while, they'd have some place to sit down. Gretchen remembered that. She plopped herself down and leaned against the vertical wooden windbreaker on the side of the stand to keep my newspapers from blowing away if the wind picked up. She had this look of indecision on her face, so I just kept quiet and let her sort things out, if that was what she was doing. Part 3. The favor. I didn't want to get too confused in the story about 4 different women, of which only 2 had names so far. I then learned that this was no oversight on Gretchen's part. I was awake now. Bob, she was exasperated. I'm trying to tell you, now. The waitress looked up. She knew me from the newsstand. I smiled at her, shrugging my shoulders as if to say, am I the only one that's totally confused? The waitress smiled and went back to her newspaper, waving her cigarette at me. Part 4. Lips and Fingertips. Gifts for the bride-to-be. Girls' minds, their ideas, were not the parts of girls that men needed or wanted to have to endure listening to. It was as if a girl's intelligence was a burden that guys had to put up with in order to get to the good parts. Almost like cracking the shell of a lobster to get to the tasty stuff. Any girl that I was attracted to, who spent significant amounts of time with me, soon knew that I was very different in that regard. To me, a nice-looking, intelligent girl with an appealing figure, someone who wanted to fool around with me because she wanted sex, was just about irresistible to me. Their brains didn't frighten me. The very fact of their choosing to be with me was very arousing, very exciting. I think brains are sexy. Part 5. I finally meet Nameless, and I waited for this girl. And I waited. And I fell asleep. In my dreams, I was in a wide savanna, wading through tall golden grass, when I heard this distant tap-tap-tapping of a forest woodpecker. But I kept walking in the warm sunlight when I then heard many taps, louder now, like a deer running quickly through the tall grass, right close to me. But it was the single, insistent knock on the door and a girl's voice calling out my name that woke me out of my slumber. I opened my eyes, remembered where I was, jumped up to open that door, and then stopped, took a breath, calmed myself, as if I could, and quietly unlocked the door. I stared at the striking woman as all my fantasies of her merged with this new reality, looking up at me. With cobwebs still clinging to my brain, my words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other, as I said to the girl, I'm sorry, but the bed was so soft, I guess I fell asleep.